She only meant to hire a tutor for her struggling daughter, but when he walked into her mansion, tall, brilliant, and disarmingly confident, she felt her carefully controlled world tilt, and before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "You're too handsome to be this smart." Victoria Caldwell stood in the marble foyer of her sprawling Westchester estate, the pale afternoon light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows and catching on the veins of her polished stone floor. The foyer was grand, intimidating, a symbol of everything she had fought for since taking over her father's modest pharmaceutical company and building it into Caldwell Biotech, one of the fastest-rising firms on the Fortune 500. At just 35, she was the woman other CEOs wanted to impress and envied in equal measure. But at this moment, with a sheet of paper trembling between her manicured fingers, none of that power mattered. Her 15-year-old daughter's report card stared back at her in stark black print, and it was nothing short of a battlefield casualty report. Calculus, D. Geometry, C-. Physics, barely passing. Every red mark on the page pierced deeper than the last, not only because she had always demanded perfection, but because she knew what failure meant in their world. A girl with the Caldwell name was expected to excel. Excellence wasn't just an ideal, it was survival in the circles Victoria inhabited. Sophia stood a few feet away, arms crossed, lips pulled into that defensive scowl she had perfected over the last 2 years. Her dark hair fell in a glossy sheet over one shoulder, her uniform skirt wrinkled from hours of shifting nervously in class. "Mom," she began, her voice tight with frustration, "I tried my best. Calculus is just... it doesn't make sense. Mr. Klein goes through everything so fast, I can't keep up." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Sophia, we've talked about this. Trying isn't enough. You have 18 months before college applications. Do you think Harvard or Yale or Princeton will look at these grades and give you the benefit of the doubt? They won't. They'll see mediocrity." She flinched, her scowl turning into something more fragile, something like hurt. But Victoria pushed past it. She had no time for soft emotions. Softness hadn't gotten her through cutthroat boardroom negotiations or billion-dollar mergers. Mediocrity is not acceptable when I know you're capable of more. Her voice carried the same clipped precision she used to silence venture capitalists. The Caldwell name was currency in Westchester. Membership at elite country clubs, invitations to political fundraisers, seats on hospital boards. She had fought tooth and nail to keep that currency strong, to ensure no one could dismiss her as the pretty, curvy woman who had inherited her fortune. Every inch of her success was built on refusing to let people underestimate her, and she would not allow her daughter to be underestimated either. Sophia collapsed into a leather chair near the sweeping staircase, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't need another tutor," she muttered, as though reading her mother's mind. "I just need time." Victoria's heels clicked across the marble as she strode into her home office, the glass doors closing with a sharp click. "Time is the one thing we don't have." She slid behind her grandfather's mahogany desk, the one piece of furniture she refused to modernize. "I've already contacted Premier Academic Services. They're sending someone tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Sophia groaned from the doorway, following her. "You didn't even ask me if I wanted a tutor." "This isn't about what you want," Victoria replied, pulling open her laptop with a sharp snap. "It's about what you need and what this family requires. Do you think my father would have built this company from scratch if he sat around waiting until he felt like it? No. He sacrificed. I did too. And you will if you want to stand where I stand one day." Sophia's shoulders sagged. She didn't argue further, which was something of a victory in itself. But Victoria noticed the weariness in her daughter's eyes, the way she shrank into herself. For a moment, guilt pricked at her, but she shoved it away. Discipline mattered more than guilt. The following afternoon, Victoria stationed herself in the library to wait for the tutor's arrival. The room smelled faintly of leather and old paper, lined with first editions her father had once collected like treasures. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Carmen, her long-serving housekeeper, appeared at the door a moment later, her accent warm as she announced, "Miss Caldwell, the mathematics instructor is here." Victoria stood, smoothing the curve-hugging fabric of her ivory blouse and adjusting the pencil skirt that emphasized her hourglass frame. She expected one of the usual types, an older, retired professor, stooped but brilliant, or perhaps a nervous graduate student desperate for extra income. What she found instead nearly stopped her breath. The man standing in her foyer was tall, easily 6'2", with a lean, athletic build that filled his pressed button-down shirt and khaki pants in ways that had nothing to do with academia. His skin was a rich, warm brown, his jaw cleanly cut, his presence commanding but relaxed. He carried a slim leather briefcase in one hand and greeted me with a calm confidence that felt disarmingly different. "Good afternoon, Miss Caldwell. I'm Dr. Malcolm Reed. Premier Academic Services sent me for Sophia's calculus tutoring session." His baritone was smooth, deliberate, edged with a quiet authority that made the polished foyer suddenly feel too small. Victoria's mouth opened before she realized what she was saying. "Oh, She caught herself, straightened her shoulders. "Yes, of course. Please, come in." He stepped into the library with a casual confidence, placing his briefcase on the mahogany table as if it belonged there. Victoria followed, her eyes drawn against her will to the easy grace of his movements. This was not what she had expected, not at all, and she hated how much that realization unsettled her. "I understand Sophia is struggling with calculus concepts. I've reviewed her test scores. The issues aren't about intelligence, they're about method. We'll focus on different approaches to the material, ones that match her learning style." Victoria folded her arms, her posture defensive, but her gaze lingered on him longer than it should have. "Her grades have been disappointing despite her intelligence. I need her to excel, Dr. Reed, not just pass." He nodded once with quiet assurance. "That's what I'm here for." At that moment, Sophia appeared in the doorway, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, her expression radiating defeat. "So you're my new tutor?" she asked, her tone laced with defeat. "And that's what I tell all my students. No one's hopeless at calculus. It's just a matter of finding the right explanation." For the first time in weeks, Victoria saw Sophia's posture soften ever so slightly, and for the first time in years, she felt her own carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Because as Malcolm Reed sat across from her daughter and began to weave mathematics into stories of markets, motion, and change, she realized two truths at once. Her daughter might finally have a chance to succeed, and she, Victoria Caldwell, was in far more danger than she had ever been in any boardroom, because she could not ignore the fact that her new tutor was far too handsome to be this smart. The library smelled faintly of sandalwood and old leather, a warm contrast to the sharp winter air outside. Sophia dropped her backpack onto the polished floor, her sigh loud enough to echo between the shelves. "I'm warning you," she muttered, slumping into the seat across from Malcolm. "I'm basically hopeless at this stuff." Malcolm didn't flinch. He adjusted his tablet, opening a graphing program that projected colorful curves onto the table like living art. "I don't believe in hopeless students," he said easily, his dark eyes calm and steady. "I believe in mismatched teaching styles. The way your brain processes information isn't broken. It just hasn't been spoken to in the right language yet." Victoria hovered by the fireplace, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She told herself she was only there to monitor the lesson, to ensure this highly recommended tutor was worth the steep fees she was paying. But her gaze lingered on Malcolm more than she cared to admit. The relaxed confidence in his shoulders, the deliberate way he explained each concept without rushing, the warmth in his voice when he addressed Sophia. Sophia leaned forward despite herself. "So, what language do you think my brain speaks?" Malcolm smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth curving just enough to reveal a dimple she had no business noticing. Let's find out. Tell me something you actually care about. Doesn't matter what it is. Music, sports, art, your mom's company's stock price. That last one made Sophia snort. Definitely not her stock price. I like drawing. And I don't know, I like video games. Perfect. He tapped the screen, and the graph shifted into a curve that resembled a simple landscape line. Imagine this is a hill in one of your drawings. Calculus helps you figure out how steep the hill is at any point, so your character doesn't tumble down. Or imagine you're programming a game. The slope tells you how fast a character slides or slows down. Sophia blinked, then leaned closer. Wait, that actually makes sense. So derivatives are like speedometers for change? Exactly, Malcolm said, his smile widening. See? Not hopeless at all. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She had seen half a dozen tutors fail to coax even mild interest from Sophia, but here her daughter was, eyes wide, engaged, asking questions. Something in her chest loosened, though it was quickly replaced by something else, a flutter she didn't like. She told herself it was only gratitude, but gratitude shouldn't make her palms feel warm or her breath quicken whenever Malcolm spoke. For the next hour, the lesson unfolded like an unexpected miracle. Malcolm drew connections between formulas and real life, how markets fluctuated, how bridges held weight, how medicine dosages changed over time. Sophia answered problems correctly for the first time in weeks, her defensive posture melting into cautious pride. "This actually isn't as bad as I thought," she admitted near the end, chewing the cap of her pen with a thoughtful look. "Why doesn't my teacher explain it like this?" Malcolm closed his tablet with a soft click. Different people learn differently. Some teachers are brilliant researchers, but poor communicators. My job is to translate. He glanced at Victoria as he said it, his gaze steady, his meaning broader than just calculus. She felt the air shift between them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it hit her like a current. For the briefest second, she saw herself through his eyes, not as the unyielding executive or the domineering mother, but as a woman standing too close, studying him too intently, her curves outlined by silk and pencil skirt. She looked away quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. When the session ended, Sophia bounded upstairs with unusual energy, promising to finish her homework before dinner. Victoria stayed behind, pretending to organize the books on her desk. Malcolm slid his materials into his briefcase with methodical precision, but she felt his awareness of her, sharp and undeniable. "You exceeded my expectations," she admitted finally, breaking the silence. "Sophia hasn't responded to anyone like that before. You made her believe in herself again. For that, I'm grateful." He inclined his head, his voice calm. "Sophia is very bright. She just needed a different framework. I think we'll see a lot of progress in the next few weeks." Victoria hesitated, torn between professionalism and the curiosity gnawing at her. "Where did you learn to teach like that? Most tutors just recite formulas." Malcolm's lips quirked as he closed the latches on his case. "Combination of experience and necessity. I taught undergrads while finishing my doctorate at MIT, then worked in New York City schools. If you can explain calculus to a room full of teenagers who'd rather be anywhere else, you can explain it to anyone." "MIT?" Victoria's brows lifted despite herself. "Impressive. And you chose tutoring over a professorship?" "I wanted to make a direct impact," he said simply, "and tutoring gives me the flexibility to pursue my research without academic politics." His words carried quiet conviction, but Victoria barely heard them. She was too distracted by the way his presence filled the room, by the easy rhythm of his voice. She caught herself staring and quickly looked away, adjusting a vase on the side table that didn't need adjusting. At that moment, her phone buzzed across the desk. She pressed speakerphone without checking the caller, her mother's voice filling the library like a cold draft. "Victoria, darling, don't forget tomorrow's luncheon with the Westchester Republican Women's Club. Judge Whitmore's wife wants to discuss Sophia's internship prospects. And please remember,
Appearances matter. We mustn't give people reason to whisper. Victoria winced at glancing at Malcolm. His expression remained composed, but there was no mistaking the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He understood the subtext, the carefully coded boundaries of her mother's world. "I'll call you back later, Mother," she said quickly, cutting the line. A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Family expectations can be complicated, Malcolm offered, his tone diplomatic. Victoria let out a short laugh, brittle around the edges. "That's one way of putting it." He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "The trick is deciding which expectations are worth meeting and which aren't." The words landed heavier than she wanted them to. For years, Victoria had lived her life by rules she didn't write, but enforced anyway. Rules about power, success, appearances, rules that told her who she was supposed to be and who she was not allowed to notice. And yet, standing in her library with Dr. Malcolm Reed, she realized she had already broken one of those rules. She had noticed. When he finally left, the house felt too quiet. Victoria stood at the window, watching him stride down the driveway toward his car, his frame tall and steady against the winter dusk. She pressed a hand against the glass, her reflection merging with the sight of him until it was impossible to tell where her world ended and his began. Her phone buzzed again, her mother's name flashing across the screen, but Victoria didn't answer. She wasn't ready to step back into that world, not while Malcolm Reed's voice still echoed in her mind. Because somewhere between derivatives and dinner invitations, the boundaries of her carefully controlled life had shifted. And for the first time in years, Victoria Caldwell felt something she could not control at all.
Saturday evening arrived with a biting chill that swept down the Hudson and across the manicured lawns of Westchester Estates. Victoria Caldwell adjusted her coat as she stood beside her daughter on the bustling sidewalk outside the Root Cafe, the Harlem restaurant Malcolm had suggested. She had never been here before. The neighborhood hummed with life, children laughing as they darted between parents carrying shopping bags, groups of friends spilling out of barber shops and beauty salons, the sound of music drifting from open windows. The cafe's entrance glowed with warm light, its windows fogged with the heat of conversation and the savory pull of spices. Sophia tugged at her sleeve, eyes bright with curiosity. "Smells amazing, Mom. What even is that?" Victoria inhaled, catching the tang of jerk spices and fried plantains. It was rich, intoxicating, and nothing like the delicately seasoned plates at the private country club she usually attended. She hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure." The door swung open, and Malcolm appeared, tall and commanding, his smile cutting through the cold. He wore a navy sweater that hugged his frame, casual but impossibly put together. "I'm glad you made it," he said, his voice warm. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. She had half expected herself to cancel, to retreat into the safe cocoon of catered luncheons and predictable conversations. But here she was. He ushered them inside, introducing them to the hostess by name, clearly known and respected in this space. Victoria noticed the way other patrons greeted him, warm handshakes, nods, even hugs. This was his world, and he belonged to it entirely. They were seated near the back, the table pressed against an exposed brick wall painted with a mural of jazz legends. The air buzzed with conversation, and laughter spilled across the room like music. "This is incredible," Sophia said, her wide eyes darting around the room. "So much energy." Malcolm chuckled, handing her a menu. "Wait until you taste the food." Victoria studied her own menu, filled with dishes she didn't recognize. Curry goat, oxtail stew, jerk chicken, callaloo. It was humbling to realize she'd lived an hour away her entire life, yet had never stepped into this kind of cultural richness. "What do you recommend?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. "Try the jerk chicken. It's a classic. And plantains. Can't go wrong with those." Victoria ordered cautiously, while Sophia dove headfirst into adventurous choices, her enthusiasm infectious. When the food arrived, Victoria stared down at the plate of vibrant flavors, her fork hovering uncertainly. She caught Malcolm watching her, his lips curved in faint amusement. "Go ahead," he teased. "It won't bite." She rolled her eyes, but cut into the chicken. The first bite stunned her. The spice, the heat, the smoky sweetness. "Oh," she said before she could stop herself. "That's extraordinary." "Told you," Malcolm said, his grin widening. Sophia laughed around a mouthful of plantains. "Why don't we have food like this in Westchester?" "Different communities, different cuisines. But food is a bridge. It tells stories about culture, history, struggle, and resilience." Victoria chewed thoughtfully, the weight of his words settling over her. For years she had lived within carefully drawn borders. Country clubs, boardrooms, galas, places where people looked like her, spoke like her, and thought like her. This meal, this restaurant, felt like crossing into another universe and realizing it had been there all along. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. Malcolm peppered Sophia with questions about his research, her skepticism melting into genuine admiration. He explained complex mathematical ideas in ways that made her laugh, drawing doodles on napkins and using sugar packets as makeshift graphs. Victoria found herself watching, her heart aching at the sight of her daughter's confidence blooming. But her gaze kept drifting back to Malcolm himself, the way his hands moved when he spoke, precise yet relaxed. The way his eyes lit when Sophia understood something new. The way he carried himself, not with arrogance, but with the assurance of a man who knew exactly who he was. At one point, Sophia excused herself to the restroom, leaving Victoria and Malcolm alone. The noise of the cafe swelled around them, but suddenly it felt intimate, the air between them charged. "You are not what I expected," she admitted quietly. His brow lifted. "What did you expect?" She hesitated, shame prickling at the back of her neck. "An older man, a professor type, someone less—" She trailed off, realizing she was about to say something she couldn't take back. "Less like me?" His tone was calm, but his eyes held hers, steady and unflinching. She swallowed hard. "Less intimidating." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Malcolm leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "People make assumptions. I've dealt with it all my life. Some parents ask for a different tutor when they see me at the door. They think someone who looks like me couldn't possibly teach calculus." The words cut deeper than she expected, because she recognized herself in them, that flicker of surprise she'd felt when he first arrived, the unconscious bias she had shoved aside. "And yet," he continued, his voice softening, "your daughter is thriving." Victoria exhaled slowly. "Yes, she is. And I owe you for that." His gaze lingered on her, searching, as if trying to decide how honest she was willing to be. Before he could respond, Sophia returned, brimming with excitement about dessert. The tension broke, but it lingered under the surface, like an undercurrent pulling them closer despite themselves. When dinner ended, Malcolm walked them outside. The Harlem night buzzed with energy, street vendors selling roasted nuts, laughter spilling from nearby bars, the faint sound of a saxophone echoing from the corner. Victoria shivered in the cold, and Malcolm shrugged off his coat, draping it over her before she could protest. "Thank you," she murmured, startled by the simple gesture. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the world tilt. For the first time in years, she wasn't Victoria Caldwell the CEO, or Victoria Caldwell the mother, or Victoria Caldwell the heiress. She was just a woman standing too close to a man who made her heart race in ways she had forgotten were possible. They parted ways on the sidewalk, Sophia chattering happily about the meal as Malcolm's figure receded into the night. Victoria adjusted his coat around her shoulders, the lingering warmth of his body clinging to her like a secret. As she drove back to Westchester, her daughter dozing in the passenger seat, Victoria realized something she could no longer ignore. For all her power and wealth, she had lived in a world of walls. Tonight, Malcolm Reed had opened a door, and she wasn't sure she wanted it to close again.
By Monday morning, the blast furnaces had already fired. It began as whispers at the country club,
those velvet-gloved warnings disguised as concern and spread like perfume in a closed room. Victoria heard it first from Patricia Whitmore in the locker room, where marble echoed every syllable and you could never quite tell whether you were being complimented or arraigned. "Darling," Patricia said, smoothing her blowout in the mirror, "we all adore that you're so hands-on with Sophia's education, but perhaps be mindful of appearances. Dinner in Harlem with a private tutor?" She let the word Harlem linger in the air, as if it required its own sanitizing wipe. "People talk." "They always do," Victoria replied, fastening her bracelet with a click. "Sophia's learning, that's the point." Patricia's smile didn't falter. "Of course. And do remember Judge Whitmore is still enthusiastic about Sophia's internship, provided we keep things above reproach." Above reproach. The phrase landed like a summons. Victoria kept her expression smooth, the way she did on earnings calls. Message received. By noon, she'd had 3 texts from her mother. "Optics, Victoria. We do not invite speculation. Is the tutor vetted? No unnecessary proximity." Margaret Caldwell never delivered a sentence without a subtext ledger attached. Back at the office, Victoria stared at a spreadsheet that wouldn't stop shimmering. Her CFO droned through a risk report, but all she could hear was the murmuring chorus: appearances, appearances, appearances. She had built an empire by disciplining chaos, and here she was, unsettled by a man who translated derivatives into breath and motion and, damn him, hope. That afternoon, Malcolm arrived for Sophia's session precisely at 3. Sophia bounced down the stairs before Carmen could announce him, already waving a worksheet. "I got an 89 on the quiz," she said, cheeks flushed with pride. Mr. Klein wrote, "significant improvement." "Not bad," he said, eyes crinkling. "Let's turn that into a 95. They settled at the library table. Victoria told herself she'd stay in her office, leave them be, demonstrate boundaries like the ones everyone insisted she was eroding. 5 minutes later, she was at the doorway anyway, pretending to sort the mail. Malcolm used sugar packets again, building a slope field in miniature. Each packet's an arrow. Where would the curve flow if you traced it with your finger? "Up here," she said, tracing an invisible path. "Then it flattens, so the derivative goes to 0. "Exactly," he said softly. "And what does that mean in real life?" That change slows down." She glanced up, amazed. "Like your company stock stabilizing after a spike." Victoria felt heat rise to her face, a ridiculous adolescent reaction. Of all the rooms she'd conquered, this one, her own library, was suddenly the most treacherous. He hadn't looked at her when he said it. He didn't need to. Sophia dashed upstairs for a ruler. For a moment, the house went very quiet. Malcolm closed his pen and glanced at the doorway. "You can come in, Miss Caldwell," he said, not unkindly. She stepped across the threshold. "You don't miss much, do you?" "I try not to." His tone held no arrogance, only accuracy. He studied her face, and she felt seen in a way that didn't feel like being audited. "I'm getting pressure," she said finally, "about you, about boundaries, about where I did or didn't eat dinner. And you're telling me this because—" She exhaled. Honesty was a poor strategy in most rooms, but this didn't feel like most rooms. "Because I hired you to help my daughter, and I don't want noise to drive you away. And because—" She stopped herself just short of the dangerous thing. "Because?" He prompted gently. "Because you're doing more than fixing a grade. You're rewiring how she sees herself." He nodded once, a small acknowledgement of the work, not the compliment. "Sophia comes first. That's the rule." "I know." He hesitated, as if choosing his own boundaries with care. "And there's another rule," he said, even softer. "Don't make me your rebellion." The word startled her. She laughed, but it slipped sideways. "You think I'm the sort of woman who rebels to spite her mother?" I think you're the sort of woman who's carried. At dinner, Sophia chattered about asymptotes between bites of salmon. He said it's like getting closer and closer to a line you'll never touch. Mr. Klein never said it like that. It's kind of romantic. Victoria choked on her water. Mathematically romantic, she corrected. Whatever, I like the way he explains things. Sophia's tone softened. I like the way I feel smart when I get it. After dishes, Victoria listened to the voicemail at last. Margaret's voice was crisp enough to slice. You have responsibilities to your name, your company, your daughter's future. If you cannot maintain appropriate separation between personal and professional spheres, the world will decide your motives for you, and it will not choose generously. She poured a scotch she didn't need and took it to the patio, the winter air numbing everything except the part of her that refused to be numbed at all. Her phone vibrated again, this time a text from an old donor. Heard you've been adventurous. Careful, Vic. Investors dislike unpredictability. She typed a reply, then deleted it. A second message appeared from an unknown number. This is Malcolm, sending Sophia's progress chart. Didn't want to email since it includes grades. A link, a line climbing, first jagged, then steady. She felt a flare of pride that had nothing to do with share price. Thank you, she typed back. She's glowing. So am I. Dots pulsed, then stopped. When his reply arrived, it was only, see you Thursday. We'll keep building. The next day brought a different kind of battle. At the club's philanthropy committee, Victoria sat at the curved table in a tailored navy dress that hugged every generous line of her body, like armor. Patricia presided with a smile, sharp as a pin. Before we begin, a brief note on standards. We are careful, especially now, about who we align with publicly. Harlem restaurants and private tutors are of course your prerogative. A pause, but discretion is a virtue. Victoria felt the old reflex rise, comply, smooth, lower the temperature. Another reflex, newer, louder, stood up inside her. She placed both hands on the gleaming wood. What we're careful about, she said, voice level, is excellence. My daughter's tutor is exceptional. He treats her like her mind is a place worth inhabiting. If our donors or our friends are offended by that, they can donate elsewhere and befriend other people. Silence. Then a brittle laugh from someone down the table. Patricia's smile didn't crack. Of course. Shall we move on? They moved on, but the shift was real. After the meeting, two women approached her in the corridor. Young mothers with the haunted look of people constantly counting other people's opinions. For what it's worth, my son could use someone like him. The other nodded. Mine too. I didn't know. I didn't realize. She trailed off, embarrassed by her own sentence. His name is Dr. Malcolm Reed. I'll send you his information. Victoria said it evenly, as she always did. On Thursday, Sophia nailed a practice exam, her pencil racing confidently, her back straight. When Malcolm walked her through the last question, a brutal optimization problem, Sophia grinned. Maximum area, minimum fence, like designing a park on a budget. Precisely, Malcolm said. Pleased, you're thinking in translation now. Sophia ran upstairs to call a friend with the news. The library door clicked shut behind her, and the quiet swelled again. Victoria stood across the table. You're making her brave. He met her gaze. She's doing that herself. I know. She swallowed, aware of how close they were, aware of everything she was not supposed to be aware of. I keep almost saying something I shouldn't. He waited. She shook her head, a small, helpless movement, and looked down at the page. Never mind. Not today. Good. Not today. When he left, she followed him to the foyer without quite deciding to do so. He paused with his hand on the door, then turned back. The noise will get louder, he said, not asking, just forecasting. I can handle noise. I'm built for it. Be sure Sophia doesn't have to be. The admonition landed true. She nodded. I am. That night, her mother arrived unannounced, fur collar high, eyes colder than the wind. You are courting a scandal. Margaret said, stepping into the foyer as if she owned it. Over a tutor. Over my daughter, Victoria corrected, closing the door with care. And over myself. Yourself, she let the word curdle. You think this is about self-actualization. You are a Caldwell. You do not collect causes. You manage assets. People aren't assets. Then I am mismanaging. Perhaps that's my rebellion. Then be prepared to pay for it. I always have. When her mother left, the house felt cavernous and blessedly honest. She poured water instead of scotch and stood at the kitchen island replaying Malcolm's words, "Don't make me your rebellion," and deciding he was right. Sophia was the point. The rest, temptation, heat, the unbearable pull of a man who fit too perfectly into spaces she didn't know were empty, would have to wait for a chapter written under a different sky. Still, when she climbed the stairs and passed the library, she paused in the doorway and touched the edge of the table where his hand had hovered near hers. The room smelled faintly of paper and pencil shavings and sandalwood. She closed her eyes and let herself think the forbidden sentence, privately, once, like a prayer she didn't intend to act upon. "You're too handsome to be this smart." Not today. But the line had been drawn, and somewhere beyond it waited a decision only she could make.
The storm broke on a Sunday, though the clouds had been gathering all week. Victoria Caldwell stood in her office, staring at the phone as it buzzed with messages she had no intention of opening. Emails from donors, voicemails from Patricia Whitmore. 3 texts from her mother, each sharper than the last. The final one read, "Either remove the tutor or risk losing everything we've built." She closed her eyes. Everything we've built. As if Margaret had sat in those endless board meetings, as if she had negotiated with ruthless investors who would have eaten her alive if she'd faltered. Margaret hadn't built this empire. Victoria had. And for the first time, the weight of that truth pressed against the iron bars her mother had welded around her life. The door creaked, and Sophia padded in, notebook in hand. Her hair was messy, her face glowing with the kind of quiet confidence Victoria had prayed she would one day see. "Mom," Sophia said, almost shy, "I got a 95 on my calculus test." Victoria's heart stuttered. 95? Sophia beamed, laying the paper on the desk. Dr. Reed was right. Once it clicked, it just made sense. Mr. Klein even wrote, "Excellent progress." Victoria picked up the paper, staring at the red ink, the check marks, the neat numbers. She wanted to weep, not just for the grade, but for what it meant, that her daughter was finally standing straighter in her own skin. "That's wonderful," she whispered, pulling Sophia into her arms. "I'm proud of you." Sophia hugged her tightly, then pulled back with a grin. "We're meeting Dr. Reed tomorrow to go over some new material. Is that okay?" Victoria hesitated, aware of the storm raging outside their walls. "Yes," she said firmly, "it's more than okay." The next afternoon, Malcolm arrived, punctual as always. Sophia bounded into the library with a fresh packet of worksheets, buzzing with energy. "Show him your test," Victoria urged, and Sophia slapped the paper on the table with triumphant flair. Malcolm scanned it, his eyes crinkling at the edges. "I knew you could do this," he said, pride radiating in his voice. Sophia blushed, ducking her head. "Thanks to you." "No," he corrected gently. "Thanks to you. You did the work." Victoria lingered by the shelves, pretending to straighten books she'd already aligned. Watching him with Sophia stirred something deeper than gratitude. This was more than tutoring. He was teaching her daughter resilience, patience, and the radical idea that intelligence wasn't fixed, that with the right tools, she could conquer anything. When Sophia left the room to grab a calculator, Victoria found herself caught in the silence again. Malcolm packed away a pen, then looked up, meeting her eyes. "You're quieter than usual," he said softly. "I'm thinking." She exhaled, her pulse thudding in her throat. "About everything. about expectations, about what people think they know. His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "And what do you know?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "That you're too handsome to be this smart." The silence that followed was electric. The words hung in the air, impossible to pull back. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't look away. A slow smile curved his mouth, not cocky, not mocking, but something warmer. "That's an unusual compliment," she said, her voice hushed but defiant. "It wasn't supposed to be a compliment. It was supposed to stay in my head." "And yet, here we are," he said, his tone gentle but charged. Victoria pressed her palm flat against the shelf behind her, grounding herself. "Everyone's watching me, Malcolm. They think I've already crossed a line, that I'm reckless." He closed his briefcase with deliberate calm. "Victoria, if this is about rebellion, it's not fair to you or me or Sophia. But if it's about something real, then it's yours to decide."
She studied him, her pulse racing. He wasn't chasing her, wasn't manipulating her, wasn't promising anything. He was offering honesty. That was rarer than anything she'd ever been given in her world of transactional affections. Sophia's footsteps thundered down the hall, breaking the moment. They both stepped back, masks restored. That evening, Victoria drove to her mother's house, summoned like a defendant to trial. Margaret awaited in the parlor, her pearls gleaming, her posture stiff with disapproval. "You are jeopardizing everything," Margaret said without preamble. "You think I don't know what people are whispering? A wealthy white widow entangled with her daughter's black tutor. Do you think the board won't connect dots even if they don't exist? Do you think investors will overlook impropriety?" Victoria met her mother's glare, spine straight. "Sophia is thriving. That matters more than whispers. What matters is reputation. Reputation is leverage. Lose it, and you lose everything." "No," Victoria said quietly. "I lose you, and maybe that's a price I'm willing to pay." Margaret's lips thinned into a razor line. "You're blinded by flattery, by rebellion. Don't fool yourself into thinking it's love." Victoria rose, her decision crystallizing in the marrow of her bones. "If it is," she said, "then maybe love is worth more than reputation." She left her mother speechless in the parlor, the weight of generations snapping at her heels. The following week, she invited Malcolm to coffee after a session. He hesitated, then agreed, meeting her at a quiet cafe far from Westchester eyes. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken things. "You've risked a lot already," he said finally. "So have you. Walking into a world where everyone assumes you don't belong." He shrugged, though his eyes betrayed the heaviness. "I've been walking into those rooms all my life." "I don't want to be another one of those rooms," she said fiercely. He studied her, then nodded slowly. "Then don't be." For a long time, they sat in silence, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, the noise of the cafe blurring around them. The world outside might have judged, whispered, condemned, but in that moment, they carved out something untouched. When Victoria returned home that evening, Sophia was sprawled on the couch, flipping through a math book with the ease of someone who no longer feared it. "You're glowing," Sophia said with a teasing smile. "Did you have a good meeting?" Victoria smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. "The best." For the first time in years, she felt free. Not because the whispers had stopped, not because the risks had disappeared, but because she had chosen her own path. Her empire still stood, her daughter was thriving, and somewhere in the quiet, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was room for something more. She didn't know where it would go, whether it would burn out under the weight of scrutiny or blaze into something unstoppable. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Dr. Malcolm Reed was far too handsome to be this smart, and she was finally brave enough to admit it.